welcome to Stories from My Drinking Days. My name's Harry Fell and I am the owner of Nolo Cocktails and Bars. I'm joined today by Vicky Midwood. Welcome, Vicky.
Thanks for having me, Harry.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm really looking forward to this conversation with you and getting to know you a bit better. So, I was wondering, are you happy to start with, do you remember your first drink?
Yeah, it's a great question to begin with. And yes, I do. Well, I'm saying I do. I don't know if it was my first, but I remember very clearly the first time I got drunk, I was 5 years old. So that was, and that sounds terrible, doesn't it? But my parents were very much a part of something called Round Table, and they used to entertain at weekends quite a lot. And a lot of the entertainment went on till the hours in the morning at weekends. And with two young kids, you can imagine that we were up early and would walk into the detritus that was left in the living room from the night before, which often meant a lot of bottles of booze left out on top of the cabinet that were normally tucked away, that we never saw. And so one Sunday morning, my brother thought it would be a fun idea to put a load of these drinks in one goblet or one like tumbler, and he just kept pouring a little bit from each of the spirits into a glass, topped it up with Coke and handed it to his younger sister, who downed it in one.
Oh wow.
And didn't think anything of it until a little bit later on. And I was up in my bedroom. I think he'd gone off and done something and our parents still weren't up, or maybe they were just getting up. And I remember I was sitting on the floor in my bedroom. I mean, my bedroom was quite a big bedroom, and I had a little mini trampoline in there, a kid's trampoline. And I remember sitting on the floor thinking, I want to get on that trampoline, but I feel a bit funny. And I was just literally, I was kind of spinning. And I don't know if my body was moving, but it felt like it was. And I liked it. And I can specifically remember liking that sensation. And it's obviously then I think that my mum realised what had happened and was absolutely horrified that I realised maybe it wasn't a good thing. But yeah, that was my first experience of what being drunk felt like. And I knew that I enjoyed it.
And so you were 5 years old when that happened then?
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's obviously why my parents were horrified, because a 5-year-old kid who's drunk. Yeah. And then I remember from that, I just remember very occasionally, because we now knew where these bottles were, every so often I would find myself taking out the cork. So my parents had an affiliation with Spain, and they brought back these bottles, I'm talking like really sort of 70s style stuff. But these bottles were wrapped in sort of leather, and they said like brandy and whiskey and stuff on them. And it was like a sort of old school book things that you think of, like this leather bound bottle with gold writing. And they had these fancy corks. And I remember even, sort of 7, 8 years old, taking the cork out and just, dare I have a little swig? And I did used to do that, just because I think I was being naughty and sneaking behind people's backs, and I knew that I could. But yeah, there was something that drew me to alcohol. And even from being like 10 or 11, when my dad used to come home, I would offer to make him a gin and tonic. And there was something about just pouring it out into a glass, and I just quite enjoyed it. So it's quite funny that I ended up behind a bar and serving alcohol, because I'd had good practice. I used to love serving drinks at my parents' do's. So alcohol was a big part of my childhood. But I always associated it with fun, with having a good time, and it was never frowned upon. So yeah, that was my first taste of being drunk.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, I think that's definitely the youngest story we've had. So how did your relationship with drinking alcohol sort of really start, though? I'm guessing you weren't regularly drinking from the age of 5.
No, I wasn't. It was, as I say, it was around me all of the times, and it was never a thing that was restricted, and it was never I was never told you couldn't. So at Christmas, we could have wine with Christmas lunch, and I didn't really like it, if I'm quite honest. I didn't actually like the taste at all. But when I got to 12 years old and I already had on my way to being really taken over, if you like, or absorbed in bulimia, the eating disorder that I was struggling with. And I was kind of 11 when I began that journey. So by the age of 12, I discovered that if I drank, I wasn't thinking about food all of the time. And also if I drank on an empty stomach, because I wasn't eating a great deal, or what I was eating, I was getting rid of, I didn't need very many drinks to have that same feeling that I remember. And it was a kind of a nice floaty feeling, but I knew what was going on. And when I was 12, nearly 13, I was quite tall for my age. I lived in a small town where people kind of knew who I was and they sort of knew my family, so I could get into places. So at 12 and 13, my friends were a year older than me. So the way that our schooling was, I was one of the youngest in the school. So my friends were all like 12 months older than me, but I was the one who could get served. So I would be the one who would go up to the bar and they would all be drinking half a pint of beer and I'd have a glass of wine because I knew it was higher in alcohol, was less calories in my head, and would get me drunk faster. And 3 glasses of wine I knew I could handle and feel good and be fine. And so that became quite a regular thing when I was at school. So I was 12, 13 when that started. And I didn't drink at home. It wasn't something that I did do. But I was, by that age, by 13, I'd got myself a part-time job in a pub in the town centre, and I was working obviously not behind the bar but serving food, so alcohol was accessible, and the lady whose place it was, bless her, would often encourage me to have a glass of wine whilst I was working, and I wasn't going to say no. And I didn't say no because I wanted to feel a part of, and the fact that she was treating me more like a grown-up and older than I was, I liked it. And so, yeah, I'd be working my shift in the restaurant or in the pub serving pub lunches and have a glass of wine on the side that I'd just be sipping at. So it became a regular part of my week, not all the time and not every day, but it wasn't something that was unusual from the age of 13, 14 onwards.
Yeah, yeah. And then did that lead you to drinking more as you got older, or?
It definitely did, but I still didn't. I was basically swapping eating for drinking because my mind at the time, and when I say this, it just sounds so bonkers, but at the time when I was thinking it, it just made so much sense in my head. I was really struggling at that point with food and my weight and bulimia. And for anybody who's had an eating disorder, you believe you're in charge of it until you suddenly realize that it is now in charge of you. And I remember just wishing and hoping and praying and saying, I wish I was an alcoholic because at least you can stop drinking, right? Whereas with a food issue, you can't stop eating, full stop. And that, I kept repeating that in my head. And I now obviously know the power of the universe, right? What you ask for, you receive, right? Well, I admitted to say I didn't want them both. I wanted the alcohol and not the food. So I did end up really convincing myself that I didn't have to think about it, worry about food if I was drinking, because I didn't feel that I needed to eat, because I was convincing myself, well, you're getting energy. So I was literally living on, by the time I was 16, I was literally living on black coffee, the occasional cigarette, and alcohol. And that was my healthy diet. It was one of those things where I ended up wanting to have it on a daily basis, but money was a thing. Obviously, at 16, I was working part-time, but I was studying for my A-levels, badly, not very well. And I ended up often stealing small cans of wine. Sorry, M&S, but I stole quite a lot of stuff because it was in the town centre. My college was near to the town centre. I could walk into town at lunchtime. And so they had the little mini cans of wine, and later on they had gin and tonics, and they would become something that I would put in my water bottle, because wine and soda was my go-to. I wasn't really, and beer, I wasn't really a spirits person. But when I became a fitness instructor, and I felt the need much later on when I was absolutely a functional alcoholic, I would have a bottle of water on the stage with me, and I would also have a second bottle that still looked like water, but it wasn't. It was gin and tonic, because I tried wine and soda, but that looks like pee. Which doesn't look good. It doesn't look good in a bottle of water. It should be clear.
No, it's harder to hide, isn't it?
Yeah. It's harder to hide. And oftentimes I wouldn't know which bottle I was taking a sip out of, but I didn't really care. So the answer is, it slowly took over. I didn't make a conscious decision to not eat and just drink. It was just something that became more and more of what I did. And I was hanging around with people who were drinking. I got a job at 17. Sorry, I lie. I got a job at 18 in a bar, working behind the bar as a cocktail person. And I just loved it. I was the one, my memory at that point was good. It's really not now. And I know that that's a lot to do with my drinking and everything else. But back then I could remember all of the ingredients in the cocktail handbook. And so very quickly, they wanted me to take over and manage that position of running the cocktail bar. And that's where I met my first husband. And he obviously was a customer, and very much was into that champagne lifestyle. And I just fell for it hook, line and sinker. I was 18 years old. He was a guy who's older than me. He drove a Porsche. He took me out on VIP nights in nightclubs where we sat and had champagne. And I thought, this is it. I've made it. So alcohol then with him was something that I did do pretty much every single day, except we ended up getting a flat together. He never drank at home, which I found was weird, because by this point I was like, well, it's just normal to drink every day. We're at home, we'll have a bottle of wine or it's beer in the fridge. And I was putting things like Baileys in my coffee instead of milk, because you can.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was kind of how I was from 18 years old onwards. I would sometimes, when I was at home, I would have orange juice and I would put vodka in it. And that was the only time that I would veer away from a beer or my wine and soda. But he never drank at home, only ever when we were out. And that's when I already twigged, okay, maybe I have a drink. And I knew that I had, but there was no way you were going to tell me I had a problem, or he was going to tell me, or anybody was going to tell me at that point. I didn't really recognize that I wanted to change things until I was in my 20s. And even then I wasn't going to go to anybody for help, because I felt ashamed. I felt I should be able to sort it out myself. And of course I didn't, and I couldn't, because I didn't know how.
Yeah. So it sounds like your husband was very much a social drinker then, just being able to cut it off at home.
Absolutely, yeah.
So
and that's something I
then affect
couldn't.
that relationship?
Here's the thing: it didn't. I didn't think, but when you're in it, you don't really know. Whether a long time, but for anybody who knows who I'm talking about, he was a bit of a man about town. So he was pretty much out socializing. And if it wasn't with me, he was with somebody else. I just didn't know it at the time. Right? He was also married, right? And I didn't know that for the first year. I didn't know that. So there was a lot of things that went on that I didn't know about. He was also addicted to smoking weed. I didn't know that either, and gambling. So as people would say in the North, it was a dead wrong one. But I was attracted to the glamour, to the cars, to the restaurants, to the VIP stuff, to all the good stuff. And so if he was bothered by it, I honestly don't know until we got married. And we went to Barbados, and it literally was totally on the spur of the moment thing that if it was easy for us to sort out getting a license to get married, we were going to do it. And if it wasn't, we weren't. So we took our outfits with us just in case. And we met some friends out there, and it was on the honeymoon that he booked a separate suite, which was incredible. The hotel had a long kind of pier that went out into the sea, and the honeymoon suite was at the end of this pier. It was just like something out of a magical storybook. I just had to pinch myself that I was there. But the fridge was full of champagne. And so although we'd had a great time on the wedding day, the following day he was as hungover as I don't know what. And I literally opened the fridge and hit the champagne for the rest of the 4 days that we had left, because you had to be in Barbados for, I think, 11 days before you could get married. So we didn't have long left. And I was just drunk pretty much the whole time. And so, yes, he made a comment then. And as soon as we got back, it all just went downhill from there. And within the space of a month, I was looking to get a divorce. So... yeah, it was. I knew it was a mistake, but also that's when I think he felt he could now say what perhaps he'd not said, and he was hacked off with both the way that I behaved around food and alcohol. So the answer is it did, but I didn't. I was oblivious to it most of the time.
Yeah, and you were very young as well, weren't you, at the time? So.
I was, yeah, and I literally then just found somebody else to replace him who definitely was an alcoholic, because I wasn't, obviously, in my head, but he was. And I was almost trying to be a saviour to stop him from drinking so much whilst I was just as bad. So I literally jumped out of one relationship straight into another one, and I did end up marrying him as well. And he ran the bar and the restaurant that I originally worked in when I was 18. It had been taken over by a couple of other people in between time. And then he was the owner, and I'd known him for donkey's years. So I literally swapped one addict for another.
Yeah. Like a repeating behaviour, isn't it, really?
Totally. And, obviously he was a restaurateur, so food and alcohol were on tap. And nobody thought anything of it because everybody was drinking. The chefs all smoked. Everybody drank after a shift. It's what we did. Clients buy you a drink. Oh, have a drink with me. You don't say no. I was working as a fitness instructor, and the majority of my clients also came to the restaurant and to the bar. So, we've got this kind of dual life going on that I'm trying to show that I'm this epitome of health with exercising and teaching classes and personal training people and telling them all about nutrition, and I'm not doing any of it myself, right? And then we're meeting socially and getting hammered in the bar and then just rinse and repeat. And that was my life for a long time. Yeah. And somehow we were licensed till 2:00 in the morning. First of all, late licensing came until 1, and then it was 2. And our bar was really busy. People would come to us after the pubs closed, and free doorman, 12 bar staff on a weekend. And by the time I'd made sure all the staff got home safely, it would be like 5:00 in the morning before we would get to bed. And I'd be teaching classes at 9. And to be able to keep on going, I was literally fueling myself on caffeine, cigarettes, and alcohol. So it's hardly surprising now that I've got all kinds of autoimmune issues and have had a heart attack and all of these physical things that you think you're immune to when you're going through this stuff, because you think you're invincible, especially when you're young. And I'm different because it's not going to affect me. And, the reality is it has, but you can't feel it at the time. So yeah, I really did have a love-hate relationship with it, if I'm honest.
Yeah. And so I know that your second marriage also ended. Was that anything to do with both of you drinking too much? And
everything.
Was it?
Yeah, absolutely everything to do with it, because he was a great chef. There's no doubt about it. He was a great chef, but he wasn't a great businessman. And so the deal that it got into with this place I'm talking about wasn't the deal that it thought it was. And his partners wanted to leave, and he thought it was in for a big payout, and he didn't get anything out of it at all. So he was left with no job. And it was like, who's going to hire you? They know your reputation. You're not going to work for somebody. So he ended up in various different places and wasn't happy. And I just kind of tagged along and was trying to support him while still running my fitness business. But I could see that he wasn't motivated to do things, and he was drinking more and more. And it was starting to become a problem between us, even though I was probably, if I'm honest, equaling him, if not drinking more, but he was the one in my head that had a problem. It escalated in that his son from his first marriage came to live with us, and he ended up supplying drugs at school, and there was all these issues. He got arrested, and his dad wasn't fit to go because he was drunk. And I was pregnant at this point and had to rock up and get his son bailed out because he was too pissed to drive. And I was just like, I can't, this is not what I signed up for. I had to get out of it. We had to declare ourselves bankrupt, but he refused to. He wouldn't own up to the fact. And this was all because when you are that deep into an addiction, you become excellent at lying. And you become excellent at not just lying to family and friends about what's going on, but also to yourself. And so he wasn't honest about just exactly where we were from a financial position. So it ended up with bailiffs knocking on the door and him hiding and pretending that we weren't there. And that was the point where I had to say, I am going to declare myself bankrupt, and I need to step out of this because I can't bring a child up into this environment. I just can't do it. Now, you'd think that might be the point where I would take a long, hard look at myself, but unfortunately, and I am so ashamed and embarrassed to say this, and I have had to apologize to my daughter because I was drinking the whole time I was pregnant. I could not stop. And, this is something, and I was smoking as well. And when I look back, the behavior was just complete madness. But because he was not working, he was meeting me, and we still weren't together. We weren't living together, but I was still meeting up with him. It's not that I didn't love the guy. I did. I just knew that I couldn't help him. And we were just enabling each other to remain totally stuck. But yeah, I managed to get out of that. But before I knew it, I was back in another relationship again.
So what age were you at this point, Vicky?
So I was pregnant with my daughter when I was 29. So she's going to be 26 in June this year. And I was free and single for a year and a bit. And then I met somebody. It was my stepsister's wedding. And I met somebody then and ended up having a commuting relationship. And that's where, I already knew by this point that alcohol was a problem. My parents knew. They really wanted to wash their hands of me. I had embarrassed the family on multiple occasions. The amount of drinking stories that I could tell you. My nickname around Huddersfield Town was Bambi, because I used to literally get so pissed I would just keep falling over, and then I'd just get up again. And when you're very thin, alcohol affects you significantly more quickly. But again, this crazy idea that, I'm fine. And I would stand up when I remember a couple of family parties where I just thought it would be a good idea to say a speech. It was not even my party, and I did it at somebody's wedding. And, at that time I'd heard the term blackout, but didn't really understand what it meant. I thought a blackout was when you pass out, literally conk out. I didn't realize that you could say stuff and do stuff that you genuinely didn't remember. And that's what a blackout was. But I took over somebody's wedding and started giving a speech, and I was just a guest. The fallout from some of this stuff, when you look back on it, it's horrified. And I missed major events. A lady that I worked for had got serious terminal cancer and she was going to get married. And I didn't make that wedding because I was too drunk to make it. So there's things like that. You can't do those things and not know that there's an issue. But by that point, I didn't know how to help myself. Or I think it's more true to say I didn't want to go to the only place that I'd heard of, which was AA, because I didn't want people to know me. I was in a small town where people did know my whole family. My dad was quite a big businessman. He did a lot of stuff for charities and all kinds of stuff. People knew who I was. People knew me and my brother. Hence, they took hands at me because they heard via the grapevine what I was up to. Even if they weren't anywhere near me, they knew what was going on. And I just like, I'm not one of those, in inverted commas, because an alcoholic to me was that epitome of what you see on TV programs, a down and out, somebody who's hopeless, somebody who's not very intelligent, somebody who basically has got no choice. And I was like, I'm not that. And I didn't know how else or who else to go to help myself. And so I just kept trying to stop, trying to cut down, trying not to buy as much as I used to, and then finding myself needing to go out late at night to get something. All of the crazy things that take control has done. And yeah, this guy liked to drink too. So, but he would make comments about it. And that's when I started to become really sneaky and started to hide it. So, by this time I moved down to London when I was in my 30s. I was 31. So at 32, my daughter was 3 when we moved from Huddersfield to London. And by this point I was drinking wine and soda out of her plastic kiddie cups. And they would be dotted around the house so that nobody would think that they were my drinks. But just about every room had a white wine and soda available for me, because by that point I needed it just to function.
Yeah. And so what made you change? What made you eventually give up?
It was first, so I actually was given an ultimatum by this guy who basically said, you need help. And he got me a place to go into a rehab, the Nightingale Hospital in Huddersfield. In London. And I was absolutely furious. I mean, livid, because it meant that I was going to miss a family member's wedding. And I was just like, how dare you do this? With the dates coinciding, how inconsiderate, how selfish, blah, blah, blah. And I went in and there were rules. And I was so arrogant. They were like, you can't take your phone in, you can't take any music in. And I'm going, I am going to take my music in. I'm a fitness instructor. I need to be able to work out, and I need my phone because my daughter, she's going to be staying with her, she needs to be in contact with her mum. And I must have been so forceful that they let me. So the rules that were supposed to be enforced in this place, I'd already kind of flouted them. So I've already got this idea that the rules don't apply to me. And I just played along. And I absolutely did. And I knew damn well I was doing it. I just played along with saying the stuff that I thought they wanted me to say and acting as if. To the extent that I actually walked out of there, not once, but twice, and went to get some cigarettes myself from a shop. I didn't drink while I was there. And nobody stopped me leaving, and nobody stopped me on the way in. In fact, somebody asked me on the way in the second time I'd done it if I worked there, if I was one of the staff. Right. And I was just like, this is an absolute kind of joke. And I just thought, what is supposed to be happening here, and what am I meant to be getting from this? Because I didn't really get it. There was an emphasis then of you going back every week to do. And I was only in there for a short period of time. And I was just like, okay, so now I'm not drinking. And I got a comment from a partner who actually came up with those words that you think nobody's going to really say that. But he did. You're boring now, you don't drink. And I'm like, you're living with me and you're the one who made me go there. And I'm doing all of the stuff that I'm told to do, even though I'm hating it. And that's what you come out with. And by that point, I was already questioning whether I even should be with this guy. And so guess what? I met somebody else. which is kind of like my pattern of just like, you know what, move on to the next one. And I just slowly started to drink again. And the stories that you hear that if you put alcohol down and then you pick it back up, it becomes worse. I genuinely didn't think, because I'm still that arrogant. I'm different. Won't happen to me. But it did. I started to pick up hiding it, and I thought I was getting away with it. And eventually I was back to what I was drinking before plus. So I did. I escalated the level that I was drinking at significantly. And it really came to, so I ended up leaving this guy, and it was terrible because there was physical violence because I told him that I'd met somebody else, and was literally, he broke my ribs and various other things, which I won't go into. So I left and went into a hotel, ended up living with this other guy who also was in a relationship and wasn't going to leave his wife. So I was kind of half in and half out of a relationship. And that went on for 3 years, where by this point, I wanted to stop, but I couldn't. I knew I was totally hooked, and I didn't know how to do anything about it. And, throughout this whole time, there's been times where I tried to take my own life, but I got a daughter. And towards the kind of the reason why I eventually stopped, I literally was spending every waking moment thinking about how could I kill myself and my daughter and ensure that neither one of us survived. In other words, how could I guarantee it? And I couldn't come up with a way that I could definitely guarantee that either she would die and I'd be left and not be able to deal with it, or I would die and she'd be left and my family I knew would not step in and help. And that was kind of where my life was. It was pretty dire. And what actually happened was nothing to do with me. It was circumstances that all collided together that meant that I was meant to be visiting my family for a bank holiday weekend, May bank holiday weekend, arranged the hotel, was going to go up there with my daughter. And then at the very last minute, this guy said, I'm going to come with you. Originally, he was working. He wasn't going to come. And he said, jump into my car. Literally, I was about to leave. He said, throw everything into my car. I'll drive us up, right? Because my car's bigger and blah, blah, blah. And so my trusty bottle of water that was gin and tonic. I picked up the wrong one because I grabbed it quickly. And so between London and Huddersfield, I started to have withdrawal symptoms. By the time, which is like 4.5 hours, by the time we got to the hotel, I was not in a good way. That night, I was suffering from hallucinations. And the following day, I was really in a bad way. And my dad came to pick up my daughter, and he just sort of said, look, Vicky's not feeling very well. You're okay to sort of take her out on your own. And he took me out for lunch. He said, I think you better have a drink. He said, I think you've got withdrawal symptoms. And so he got me a wine and soda. I took a mouthful, and I could just feel it was going to come straight back up. And I literally made it to the loos just in time. And it did. And it came straight back up. And that's the last mouthful of alcohol that I had in 2005. When we took that weekend, I didn't let on how bad things were, but I was seeing things moving and I was hearing voices. It happened to be, obviously, it was half term, as it is. The bank holidays usually coincide with half term. So I didn't kind of say what was happening until the fourth day of us being back home. And he twigged that something was seriously the matter because I'd walked my daughter all the way to school. It was half term. There was no school. And back again, and I was on the high street trying to break into cars because I thought cars were mine. Somebody called an ambulance, and I ended up going to the hospital, who then said, well, she's obviously pissed. I'm going, no, I'm not. I'm absolutely not. They weren't hearing me. And they tried to shove some kind of pull down my throat, which I'm afraid I did that old classic of hide it behind your tooth, pretend you've swallowed it. And I was having none of it. And that's when they let me go at stupid o'clock in the morning. To this day, not the foggiest how I got home. I do not know how I got from the hospital to the house, not a clue. But the following day, this guy rang my local GP, and literally was across the road from us, very, very close. And she took one look at me and how I was behaving, and she rang the local priory, which was not very far away from us. And she just said, get her there now. Get her in. She's suffering serious alcohol withdrawal symptoms. By the time I was in there, I don't really remember exactly what happened, but I know I was under observation for 48 hours because they weren't sure if I would survive. My heart rate was crazy low, which is anyway. That's because of my eating issues and anorexia effects, all of that. But also my blood pressure was seriously low, and they didn't know if I was going to be brain damaged. So long story short, I woke up and basically the therapist just went, so do you think you've got a drinking problem? I just went, duh. What do I need to do? I was more than ready. And finally, I was in a space and in a place where I could have space. And I was ready then to just do whatever they said I should do. But it wasn't an easy journey. But I truly believe that that is the power of the universe that stepped in. I didn't have an amazing moment where I just thought, right, that's enough. I'm going to stop. Something bigger than me stepped in and made it so that those were the circumstances. And I'm really fortunate and really grateful that I never had the urge again to pick up. I just didn't. So I didn't get out of rehab thinking, oh my God, I'm going to white knuckle it and all that. And I absolutely didn't. I also went to South Africa because the guy who was in the rehab, he recognized that physically my body was just like shot. And he just said, look, if you go back to the circumstances that you're in after only a month, he said, I don't think you've got the ability to not pick up again yet. You haven't got the life skills. You've been addicted for so long. I think you should go to South Africa, where we have a place where you can go for 2 months, a month in primary care and then secondary care, to basically learn how to live like a normal adult. Because I hadn't known how to do that since I was like 11, 12 years old, with all of the eating disorder and everything else. You end up staying like a kid. And so that's what happened. Fortunately for me, my uncle stepped in and looked after my daughter. It was throughout the summer. So all of July and August, I was in South Africa. And that's where, I'm just forever grateful to that guy for recognizing that I needed to be away longer. And just then got the opportunity to decide what I wanted to do. And it's when I was there that I was just like, why didn't I understand what addiction was? Because what they did in South Africa that they didn't do in the UK Priory at the time, I think that's changed. They actually educated you on brain, how your brain works and how the brain and the body connect, and just exactly what addiction is and what is going on. And I was like, if I'd have known that, I potentially could have helped myself. Honestly, truthful, I don't know if I would have done, to be honest. But I was just like, why don't people know this? And I knew then that I wanted to do something. I didn't know what, to help other people, for it to just not be such a struggle, to be able to get help, and to let them know that they weren't broken, that they weren't stupid, that they weren't lacking in willpower, or any of that stuff that I believed that I was, and that it didn't have to be as hard as it had been for me. And so that's really what got me into learning, okay, how the heck do I do this? So I did go on to study addiction psychology as a master's. I took my teaching qualification because I'd not been to university. Throughout all the madness of my eating disorders, flunking my A-levels, going to work, getting a job as a fitness instructor, I'd never been to university. So when I was in South Africa, I just had space and time to go, what do I want to do? And that was an absolute gift. And I know I'm so fortunate to have had that. And that is really why I do what I do, because I believe that I didn't go through that stuff to just like go, oh yeah, that's what happened. I think it is my duty and my passion in it. And I just feel that people need to know how to help themselves and to not believe all of the BS that is still out there. And it hasn't changed in all those years. I mean, I'm talking 2005. It's not quite heading for 20 years that I haven't had a drink. And yet I'm still hearing the same BS that is being bandied about addiction. And it's just like, It's slowly starting to change, but it's way too slow for my liking.
Yeah. So almost 20 years without a drink. How's the eating disorders now? Are you in control of your eating as well?
It's a really, really good question because, as you may know, it's very easy to swap one addiction for another. And yes, I had them dual addictions going on. And when I put one down, did the other one pop its head up big time? Yes, it did. Not quite in the same way. But I would say that I then needed to tackle what were the issues that were going on with my eating, with my body image. I didn't know when I came out of rehab if I even still wanted to be a fitness instructor or be in that world. Because obviously it's very much based upon aesthetics and how you look and body size and shape. And I was just like, I don't know, do I want to be part of that? Again, the universe stepped in with circumstances that meant I ended up teaching a class in a gym that I'd joined as a member. Because the instructor at the last minute let them down, and something inside of me just went, oh, I can teach this class. And I did. And they all went, oh my God, will you be our instructor? And I was like, okay, maybe I should still do this, but maybe not in the same way. And that was kind of where I realized I wanted to build my own business and not work for somebody else. I did end up freelancing in clubs, but I also started to build my own fitness business. And with stress comes a lot of different physiological, biochemical, neurological issues that often have you turning to certain foods to soothe, to feel better. And that took me in to a whole other level of understanding nutrition, because I knew that if I wanted to help myself, I needed to delve deep. It wasn't just the surface stuff of how to lose body fat and feel comfortable. It wasn't that. There was more to it. And why were certain foods having the power over me that I felt that they did? Again, it was back to me really educating myself to a deeper level. So I went into functional medicine, I went into integrative health, deep into nutrition and science of nutrition, and recognizing that everything works with everything else. And so, yeah, it took a while for me to really get to grips with the food issues, because, you know, as I said before, it's quite easy to put alcohol down. You don't have to drink. Food's a whole other ball game. And a lot of the time with the food that's available to us now, we're not always sure what's in it, and we're not always sure what it's doing within us. And just recognizing that what is healthy food for one person may not be for others. There is no such thing as one size fits all. So getting away from this message of this is what a healthy diet looks like, this is how you should do this. I had to unlearn a lot of BS and help to really properly educate myself. So to say that I got over the eating disorder, I think fully wasn't until my 40s, if I'm honest. And then that's really when, ironically, because of my history and the damage that I've done to my gut, the very foods that were my trigger foods, actually my body cannot tolerate at all. Because I've got autoimmune issues. So now, instead of me trying to resist those foods, I actually, if I eat them now, I'm in pain, I'm in discomfort. And so, I think it's quite funny that maybe that's what these foods were telling me all along. These foods don't suit you. It's been a journey, absolutely. But I'm so fortunate to say that I haven't got anything else in the mix. And funnily enough, I think out of all of those issues, not smoking was probably the hardest one to kind of handle. The alcohol was easy for me, but cigarettes, that was a challenge, I have to say. But when you look at how these things all work within the body, it's not surprising that I was also addicted to cigarettes.
Yeah. So when you gave up drinking, your daughter would have been about 7.
Correct.
Does she have much memory of you when you were drinking, when when she was little?
She does, but at the time she didn't necessarily know that that's what it was that was going on. Right. I'm very fortunate in that we've been very open right the way through. It's just me and her. After the final person, after I got out of rehab, I did get out of that relationship, and I haven't been in one since. Right. I just decided But 4,
you gave up that addiction as well, then,
I gave
Vicky.
up that as well. I'm like, 4 guys, it's very clear that I'm not very good at this, so just stop. So it's been me and her since she was 7. And that means that we've had a lot over the years of open discussions about what she does remember. And obviously kids remember stuff differently. And when I was away at rehab, honestly, she thought I'd gone because to stop smoking. So she didn't know that it was the alcohol. But there are certain incidents that she does remember, like that one I told you about when I was walking down the high street, breaking into cars. She can remember that. And going in the ambulance with me to the hospital, which, is pretty scary stuff. But in terms of things, there's not a lot that she does remember, just that sometimes I wasn't available for her, in that I had blacked out, or I had fallen asleep because I was exhausted and drunk. So I know there was one time that she has never forgotten. She'd gone across the road to play, and when they came back, I wasn't answering the door because I'd passed out. And unfortunately, they did call the police, which, that's an event that happened obviously before I gave up, and that sticks in my mind because by that, obviously, I was on the radar then, which wasn't great for me or for her. But again, you get really good at lying and really good at playing the system, and it was But I think there's things that she does remember that she perhaps doesn't want to talk about, and I'm not going to push it. She's 25, 26 now, and I don't think there's anything that we haven't now talked about, and it opened up that it's really difficult to know honestly what has been the effect. But I can't be so naive as to say it hasn't had any. It's bound to have done.
Yeah, but you've got a good relationship with her now, and that's all great.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is because after the rehab, I just didn't lie. I had to basically restart. She'd been away from me for a long time, 2 months for a little person, staying with people who she didn't really know. Okay, they might be family, but she didn't really know them. And so she had a lot of adjusting to do, and she went through issues. I think when she was with them, she started to wet the bed, for example, which is a clear sign that although she outwardly might have been okay, there was stuff going on. And so, but no, we talk about everything, and she can ask me questions and she knows I'm going to tell her the truth. So I am very fortunate in that we are very open with each other.
Yeah. So I can see how your past has led to your work now, but tell us a bit about what you do now.
Yeah, so what I now do is I help people to really recognize that there is nothing wrong with them. They just need to have the right help so that they can feel better about themselves. Because ultimately, addiction comes down to us trying to soothe ourselves to feel a different way to the way that we feel. It's about not feeling safe. It's about not feeling good enough. It's about not feeling deserving, trying to be more than, and helping people to recognize that they're not the only ones who feel like that, and they're not weird, but that the substances and the things that we turn to are just a solution. They are not the problem. And that's what I help people to do, because they think food is the problem, alcohol is the problem. It's like, actually, no, it's not. Let's just shelve that idea and look at what actually is the problem, because you're only turning to those things because it's a solution. And so by helping people to think differently about what is going on and what actually is the problem, we can help them then to recognize it's not that hard to let go of the thing that they thought was the problem and look for solutions elsewhere. So that's what I help people to do. I help them to reconnect to their body, because a lot of the time, particularly with food and with alcohol, we're doing it to numb out and to just not feel. We disconnect ourselves. We kind of shut off the thinking. But the body is actually better at telling us what we need and what's going on than our head is. So I really help people to connect back to themselves, to get to the root of what actually the problem is, and then to recognize that the solution, if you do it in the right way, at the right time, for your current circumstance, it doesn't take as long as you think. And so that's what I help people to do. And I do that It may just have a habit, literally. It may be a binge drinking habit. It may be a binge eating habit. And that I can help them to sort out in just a session. Somebody else, it may be that it is a habit, but it's been a habit that's been going on for a long time, and they just genuinely don't have the tools to be able to shift it. And so, we can do that really quite quickly in just 30 days. And that, once I spend a day with people, we can get through so much stuff. And already they can kind of go, oh my God, it's like it clicks into place. Nothing that I share with people is like woo-woo or crazy or out there. It's all quite logical and obvious. But if you don't know what you don't know, then of course you can't help yourself. And then I have a longer program for those people who, like I was, have been entrenched in this stuff for decades. And maybe have gone to therapists and stuff, and they just think that, nothing's going to help me, but I'm sick of being like this and I want to do something different. And that's what I do. What I do is different. And that's the point. If you do what you've done before, you're going to get the same result. So what I offer is a totally different way of doing it. And this is what pretty much everybody I work with says. I don't know what it is that you're doing, but it's different. And that's why it works. And it does. And the thing is, it doesn't have to take years in therapy. It doesn't. But you do have to want it for yourself. And that's the first time I went into rehab, I didn't want it. So I wasn't open to doing what I needed to do to help myself, because I was still in that mindset of I'm doing it for somebody else. You have to want it for yourself. And you don't even have to believe, to be honest, that you can do it. You just have to want it. Because if you want to feel different and you want your life to not be like it is and to stop the struggle, then that's all that is required. And just you start to connect with yourself and you start to trust the process. And knowing that, I think it helps that when I talk to people, I understand the process that they're going through and I understand the thinking. So I'm not going to judge them, because everything they're telling me about, I've probably done it myself. I've probably felt it. I've probably thought it. Decades of being stuck in this stuff. There's an awful lot of things that we do that we're not necessarily proud of. But just knowing that you're not a horrible person, you're not broken, you're not flawed, or any of the horrible words we call ourselves, and just knowing that somebody else has come through it, I think it makes a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously you have great results and you've helped a lot of people. So do you tend to work in person or online these days?
I do both. I think the hybrid way of working is what works best for me, but also for my clients. Obviously, depending where people are. But there are certain things that I teach that are much easier for you to grasp quickly if it's face-to-face. So things like how to actually connect to your body on a physical level. Sure, I can do it on a screen, but it's much easier if we do it in person. Allowing you to have the space and to just relax and enable you to just learn how to meditate, how to change the language, and doing role play stuff. Also helps if you're in the same room. Yes, we can do it on screen, but it's not quite the same way, because we can set scenes and we can actually play those roles and practice the stuff. And once you've done that in person, then you can reinforce it again with online stuff. So this is why I like to do a full day at the start of my program, which 30-day one, which is Freedom Unleashed. When we have that day, we cover so much. Obviously, in 6 hours, I can cover the same as 6 1-hour sessions. So that's a chunk of work that gets you from the get-go on the right lines of understanding what to do. And because we've done it in person, you've been able to ask questions. It's relaxed. You know what? We've got no interruptions going on. You're not going to be, hearing the postman or a kid shouting at you, or you're watching the clock because you've got another Zoom call coming in. And so that makes a massive difference. And then the online stuff, then it just reinforces what we've already done. And depending on how long somebody's working with me, I do like to see them in person where possible, at least every 6 to 8 weeks. Depending on where they are, because it's just that time to spend not just an hour, but a whole half a day or a whole full day. And I like to go out with people to restaurants and to real scenarios, just so that they can practice having somebody there with them in a situation where perhaps they're a little bit fearful of going into it with somebody else. Because it's real. If you've been a drinker for a long time, going into a restaurant and being handed a wine list and what do you want to drink straight away, it can be like, oh shit, what do I do? How do I handle this? The same if you've had eating disorders and you got a flipping menu that's presented you that's full of calorie counts of food. It's like, the brain wants to go back to old habits. And so actually really living that situation and being there with the client and going, okay, this is what you say, this is how you do it, this is how we handle it, right, let's have a go for real, rather than me just saying that this is how you handle a restaurant. No, let's go do it together. Going on holiday with somebody, these are the things that crop up. It's like, if all of your friends are having a drink and they want to go clubbing after you've been out for dinner, what are you going to do? How do you handle it? So these are the things where in-person stuff is great.
Yeah. And so whereabouts are you based at the moment?
So I'm based in North London, which means it's quite easy for me to travel. Thanks to tubes and trains being very handy, no matter where in the country pretty much, which is great. And, I either go to where the client is, where possible, or if it's really a long way, we might sort of agree to meet sort of in the middle, which tends to work. And it's, So, and I love that aspect of it and I think my clients do as well, because it's just that there is something just more about that face-to-face in-person connection that I think is so vital.
Yeah, definitely. And I think people have wanted to go back to that since COVID. We lost a lot of that in-person connection. And, I think it is absolutely vital for all of our mental health. So we will put all of the links for Vicky and her work in the show notes. So if anyone's interested in getting in touch with Vicky, just check out the show notes and you'll find all of the links there. I want to say thank you very, very much for coming on and telling us your story. It's been really, really interesting. And, it's fantastic. Almost 20 years of being completely sober. Yeah. That's a real achievement.
Thank you. And just to say to anybody who's thinking, oh my God, I can't even imagine 20 months or even 20 days, right? I never thought I could ever say that. I mean, it'll be 19 years this May. But all I can say is it gets better and better. But don't think of it in years, just think of it as just one day at a time to start with. That's what I did. And one day at a time has gotten me to 19 years, going on 20.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us, Vicky. You've been listening to Stories from My Drinking Days, and my name is Harry Fell. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.